Hi, I am just going to do a summary on your discussion of the saints, the missionaries. Excellent discussion, excellent insights. There was a couple things I just wanted to comment on. One of them was that whole idea of unification, uniformity, which kind of plays into the idea of should Christianity change cultures or should they conform to a culture? And the question, I think the question of uniformity was always an issue here. We talk about it even today in the ecumenical movement, that Christian churches, how do we strive for unity but not uniformity? Uniformity usually refers to the idea of trying to make everything alike. A uniform is something we all look alike, we all wear. So uniformity means everything would look alike, no matter what culture you were in. So Christian uniformity would mean everything would be the same, pretty close to the same. Unity is a little different. Unity, on the other hand, means that we can be united, have a major focus, but that may look a little different in my community versus your community. And if you think about it in the sense of denominations within the Christian tradition. You can be Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Anglican, Episcopalian, but the overall belief is in a Trinitarian God and what that means. And if you looked at the Nicene Creed, which comes out of the Council of Nicene in 325, that's a creed that almost all Christian churches would agree with. It's when we get into doctrine, that's kind of dogma. When we get into doctrine, things look a little bit different. We do sacraments different. Those kinds of things. So here is, we're looking at unity, what unifies us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to be cookie cutters of one another. So when we look at these missionaries, we see that already happening. They were kind of struggling with that concept of uniformity versus unity. Some of you mentioned, how Cyril and Methodius kind of brought the gospel into the language of the people they were working with. And you thought, well, why wouldn't that just be the normal thing to do? Well, no, it wasn't. Because language, they believed, unified a kingdom or a country, we have that discussion today in our country. We say we're the United States of America, we speak English, but we talk about it's not really our official language. So then with a higher Hispanic culture, the question becomes, well, should we offer things in Spanish and English, or do we need to make English, the official language? Because language is seen as very important in unifying a country. And so you can understand how in their time and place, they didn't want people, they'd rather see those tribes learn the language of the church per se, Latin, teach them Latin because that keeps us all uniform. But when you speak a different language, communication issues begin. You start to have more problems. There can be troubles in translation. So you got to understand what sounds really good to us, that they're respectful of that tribe's language. There was also an issue of what it would do to communication within the church, within that part of the world. Today, we certainly, and if you think about it, especially from the Roman Catholic side, those of you who might be Roman Catholic, Latin was the official language of the church right up until the 60s. 1960. I remember growing up and going to church and hearing a Latin Mass. Sang in the choir, sang Latin. Didn't know what I was saying, but I sang it. But it was that idea of unification, and there's still that movement within, especially the Catholic Church, thinking that it would be good to have Latin again, that we all have Latin ceremonies. Now think about this. The good thing about that, especially if you could understand it, would be that you could go to a mass anywhere in the world and understand what was going on because it would be uniform. all right? It would be uniform. But we, after Vatican II, which is in the late 1950s, early 60s, the Catholic Church went to the vernacular. You can have Mass in the language of the people. So we started to have it here in English in the United States. So that argument still is not gone. That is still a part of our discussion today, because what does language do for us? So Cyril and Methodius were kind of the forerunners in this whole issue, but it also takes us into how Patrick and Boniface dealt with their missionary zeal of bringing the message, because the question becomes, do we Christianize pagan holidays or celebrations that communities were used to, or do we try to find just brand new holidays, And Patrick believed, obviously, in working with what the people were used to and giving it a Christian understanding. Boniface, on the other hand, thought that, we would have kind of these two gods kind of at work, or this idea of you had to destroy their concept of God, of their pagan God, and replace it with a Christian God. Again, that debate still goes on within the community. However, you have to look at a lot of our holidays, and I've done research on this before, so I've always got kind of stuff laying around on it. But you have to remember that the pagan tradition, their holidays were just a part of their everyday living. Religion and culture were not separate at that time. It was all one, pretty much. And so it wasn't like you had these different denominations out there. If you were part of this culture, these are the rituals. It was a part of your life. It was how you lived. It was your community celebration. So when Christianity comes into being here, the question becomes, well, do we Christianize? Do we give these a new flavor or bent? And I always point to things like Christmas and Easter. They're the two biggest holidays in Christianity, the birth of our Lord, the resurrection of our Lord. But they're also tied to pagan celebrations that occurred before the early church. I think it was that had pagan roots. The idea of Christmas for about the first 300 years of Christianity, the birth of Christ wasn't even celebrated. And so nobody really knows when the birth of Christ occurred. And so the idea became, and I think it was Pope Julius, Julius I, who actually chose December 25th to be the birth of our Lord, to celebrate the birth of our Lord. We don't know when the birth was. But it was very much tied to the winter solstice. And it seems like almost every culture had some kind, remember, monotheism grew out of this polytheistic society. So monotheism, all these polytheistic societies had gods, sun gods, things like that. And so Christianity said, well, instead of, worshiping the sun god, which was usually a week-long celebration, this will be a great holiday to call the Son of God, who is the light of the world. So they took the idea and then they gave it a Christian meaning. Same thing with Easter. I think it was originally even the word Easter, Estra, who was an Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring and dawn. And so, again, remember, new life, spring, a rejuvenation, a coming out of what looks like the death of winter. And that's basically how Christians believe. I mean, that's what we believe about the resurrection, that Jesus overcame death. So this debate on, some people think that's bad. We should never take anything from a culture and Christianize it. Others believe it's wonderful because it's a familiar thing for people, and we're just giving it a new and different meaning. So that debate still goes on today. Okay, keep up the great work. We are over halfway through, I think, or pretty close. So God bless you, doing a wonderful job.